Video games. In the 40 years that they have been widely available, they have greatly affected our culture, the way we see the world, and many other industries. Video games have been around since the 1950s, but not in the form we know them today. The first video game was developed in 1952 and was called Noughts and Crosses. It was a computerized version of Tic-Tac-Toe. And shortly after, the game Tennis for Two was programmed on a similar computer. Then later in 1961 at MIT, Space War was programmed. The game was programmed on one of the only available computers at the time and depicted two spaceships orbiting around a star attempting to blow each other up. Shortly after, Nolan Bushnell created a version of the game that was hooked up to a TV in a plastic cabinet. The game was one of the first coin-operated video arcade games, but was unsuccessful at the time. Around the same time, Ralph Baer was creating the first video game console. It was playable on a TV but lacked many graphics, the graphics being mainly white dots and dashes. He got around not having many graphics by placing plastic overlays on the screen. He sold the invention to Magnavox, who after obtaining a patent released the console for commercial distribution in 1972. Nolan Bushnell again jumped into the market in 1972 by starting the company Atari. The company's first major game is possibly the most recognized video game in history, Pong. In 1977, Atari released the Atari VCS, later renamed the Atari 2600. It was the third home video game console, but the first to be commercially successful. After the release of the 2600, many American video game developers began popping up to join the market, creating the first third-party developers in competitive video game consoles. However, because of the large number of developers, the overstimulated American video game market crashed in 1983. The crash left most companies crushed or exiting the market. Overseas, however, the video game market was flourishing, and in 1985, Nintendo, a Japanese company, entered the American market, with the now classic gray VCR-like NES. Shortly after, Sega re-entered the American market with a console of its own, triggering the Bit Wars. The Bit Wars, caused by Sega's boasting about its console's superiority as it was 16-bit and Nintendo's console was only 8-bit, caused exponential growth in the market of both computers and video games at the time. The wars lasted to the point where many consoles included the number of bits in their name, such as the Nintendo 64 or TurboGrafx 16. While the number of bits don't necessarily improve the graphical quality as much as was stated, they did force software designers and programmers to work harder to get the most out of their machines to back up their bit allocations. And over the next 18 years, computer and video game technologies would advance exponentially.
I think I was probably about 6 when I started playing computer games, for like the PC, just for fun. I would spend all day on it.
Well, my first experience with video games was seeing a Pong game in a restaurant in the late 1970s, and the friend I was with was so excited about this, and I didn't see any future in it. I wasn't a visionary who could look at that and say, wow, there's a beginning of a multi-billion-dollar industry there. To me, it looked like a waste of a quarter.
I played video games back, I guess in the late 70s, early 80s.
Video games, wow, that would probably be early 80s, the Atari. Playing low-bit, they were 8-bit games. Some of my favorites were Kaboom, Pitfall, Pac-Man.
I played video games when I was younger. I got a Super Nintendo from my parents when I was probably 10 years old, and played that on and off throughout my teens.
I've been playing computer and video games since 6th grade, and continue to play them now. From 1990 to 2000, the first 10 years of my career, I worked in the gaming industry as a developer. In that time, I worked for 3 companies, Maxis, Presage, and Lucas Learning.
Since early video games, many of their advancements have also led to advancements in computer technology.
I remember we had built the computer to end all computers. There wouldn't be any more after that. When IBM was building, I believe we called it the 3-Pi computer, had 32K. That would be all we would ever need.
The military has been using hardware-accelerated 3D for simulators for decades. The price of that hardware was very high. There were not enough consumers to bring it down. When the gaming market started driving sales, it enabled the investment to get the pricing down. By 2005, a $500 video card could render better graphics faster than a $1 million SGI box from 1990 could.
Many computers are now geared toward gaming, with graphic card, RAM, and processors continually being upgraded to allow for newer games.
Computers are capable of much more than what anybody's asking them to do with word processing or spreadsheets or just any of the accounting systems or something like that. I think we're probably seeing the use of the speed is in computer gaming.
The graphics, I think that they have helped speed up the production of faster processors.
You'll find you'll have to get a better video card for sure, with more RAM on it, a higher processor so it does more processes and can compute easier, faster streaming for you. You'll want bigger bandwidth even. So if you're online, for instance, if you're like doing AT&T and you're doing their lowest, you'll probably want to bump that up some because you're going to start using a lot of bandwidth.
That capability, the realism in the displays, the ray tracing that you have to go to figure out the traces, the shadows and that sort of thing, or just eat up enormous amounts of time to improve the resolution. But I speak of time as a percentage of the processor time.
Doing the math, my current machine computes about 16,000 times faster than my first one, has over 174,000 times as much memory, could store 10 million of the older machine's floppies on its internal hard drive, runs very realistic full 3D games at high frame rates while the old machine struggled with simple 2D animation, can generate multiple streams of CD plus quality audio while the old machine was largely limited to simple beeps, clicks, and buzzes. In inflation-adjusted dollars, the new machine costs less than 1/4 of the older machine.
While video games have helped the computer industry and have been shown to have beneficial effects in some cases, many people are still against them. Most cite how they seem to be aiding in the development of violent behaviors in teens and young adults.
I think it depends on the person, because I've played violent video games and it hasn't affected me in that way. I think it depends on the person and how into it they get and how they let it affect them. It can affect you negatively in that way, and it does affect a lot of people negatively that way, but not everyone.
And of course, I jump to the violent video games or the kind of fantasy video games. And no, not that I can think of. I don't think it's had large or significant behavioral impacts.
I've heard of stuff like that. I mean, I've read stuff like that. But, then again, we can say that movies do the same thing or other stuff. So I guess there's a lot of debate on that one. It depends on what side you're looking at it from. Playing the games, like I said, no. I've seen people lose their jobs because all they want to do is play the game, but I haven't seen anyone act out.
I haven't seen in particular too much of a change in the way people view the world or certain situations based on the content of video games.
To counteract the outcries of parents and threats from the government to extend jurisdiction over video games, in 1994, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB, was created as an independent, non-governmental ratings board for video games.
It's common belief that video games would have an effect on the people that play them beyond the time they spend playing them or their thoughts about video games and video gaming. But I really haven't seen much outside of that.
Well, my brother, I know, he recently got into Call of Duty, and that has been taking over his life. His grades have been dropping, and he's become pretty violent towards me and my parents.
Juvenile crime rates peaked just before the ESRB came into effect and have been declining ever since. Whether or not this is because of the ESRB or other policing methods is up for debate. The effects video games actually have on the way people perceive reality or the way people will behave in everyday situations is also still up for debate.
I don't think I know of anybody who's going to go steal cars, waste cops, and do a bunch of unrealistic things like jumping your car off the top of a parking garage just because they can do that in a computer game.
Grand Theft Auto being on the street, an individual in a mass of other individuals, that's much more relevant, and there are a number of other more relevant themes. So I think that yes, it's much more likely to affect someone's behavior in a way that is beyond spending time with the game or the act of gaming.
Well, I think generally there have been no real positive or negative effects that I've seen.
As I've seen both. I've seen people who are absolutely addicted to games, like they're crack almost. It's quite, but everything falls apart. I had a couple people who were friends of mine online who've lost their jobs because all they want to do is play the game. And then at the same time, you have the positive aspect, like I said, getting to know people that you would have never met before. You know, I don't think I mean, I've seen Australia when I was in the Navy, but I didn't really meet the people.
The positives are too numerous to list. It's transformed our lives. We have new ways to create, consume, and share information. With minimal investment in hardware and software, someone today can create documents, graphics, audio, and video of quality that would have been unachievable or extremely expensive 30 years ago. On the negative side, there are some significant ones. As the virtual world of information and entertainment becomes more compelling, there have been problems with addiction and health issues from staying at the computer more. With the perceived anonymity that the internet provides, we see a loss of civility and more mean-spirited behaviors and language on comment boards and in games.
I've personally played electronic, like puzzle games, and I think those help, with your imagination. They help develop your mind a little bit. But other than that, there aren't many positive effects for me personally.
Video games have had a huge effect since their mainstream introduction in 1977. They've shaped how we use computers, how we view media, and how we spend our free time. The video game industry in the last year alone is making more money than both the music and movie industries, and where it will go next is anyone's guess.